February 4, 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base, Vietnam. The air vibrated with the distant thunder of North Vietnamese artillery as Corporal James Anderson, Jr. adjusted his position on the rain-soaked hillside. 6 days into the siege, and the Marine base was surrounded by an estimated 20,000 North Vietnamese Army regulars. Intelligence suggested their commanding officers were coordinating the assault from a ridgeline just beyond standard spotting range, visible only as fleeting shadows at dawn and dusk. Anderson pressed his cheek against the worn stock of his Winchester Model 70 sniper rifle and squinted through the scope. Standard issue, and utterly inadequate for the extreme distance and poor visibility of the monsoon season. The crosshairs blurred against the dense vegetation. He could make out movement, but not with the clarity needed for the kind of precision shots that could disrupt the enemy's command structure. With trembling fingers, he reached into his rucksack and withdrew a crude device that would have earned him an immediate court-martial if discovered. A hollow bamboo tube, sealed at both ends with carefully shaped glass lenses salvaged from a destroyed village. Primitive by military standards, but crafted with the precision of a man who had spent his childhood building telescopes from scraps in the backwoods of Louisiana. "This better work," he whispered to himself, as he carefully mounted the handmade scope on top of his military-issue one, creating a makeshift telephoto system that no Marine Corps manual had ever authorized. Through the enhanced optics, the distant ridge suddenly came into focus. He could now clearly see the North Vietnamese officers, their uniform insignia distinguishable even at this extreme range. Anderson took a deep breath, adjusted for the unprecedented distance, and gently squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out across the valley, followed by the distant collapse of a high-ranking NVA officer nearly a mile away. Before the enemy could process what had happened, Anderson had already acquired his second target. No one in the 3rd Battalion, 26 Marines, knew that one man's forbidden innovation that morning would rewrite the rules of battlefield optics and save hundreds of American lives trapped within the besieged firebase. James Anderson, Jr. was born on January 15, 1947, in the small town of Omaha, Arkansas, to a family that knew both struggle and perseverance. His father, a World War II veteran who had served in a segregated unit in Italy, worked as a mechanic in a local garage, often bringing home broken parts for young James to examine. This early exposure to the mechanics of things sparked a curiosity that defined Anderson's childhood. By age 10, James had built his first telescope using cardboard tubes and lenses he had salvaged from discarded binoculars. Local teachers noted his exceptional aptitude for physics and mathematics. But in the rural South of the 1950s, such talents in a black child were rarely given the nurturing they deserved. Nevertheless, Anderson's father encouraged his son's interests, often saying, "The world might not see your brilliance yet, but that don't mean you should hide it." When Anderson turned 17, the Vietnam War was escalating, and military recruiters began appearing at his high school. Unlike many of his classmates who viewed the draft with dread, Anderson saw an opportunity. The Marines had recently integrated their sniper training program, and his uncanny marksmanship, honed through years of hunting in the Ozarks to help put food on his family's table, made him an ideal candidate. "I could hit a squirrel's eye at 300 yards with my granddaddy's old rifle," he once told a fellow recruit. Figured that might be worth something to the Corps. Anderson enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in January 1965, just days after his 18th birthday. Boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, was a crucible that tested not only his physical endurance, but his resilience in the face of lingering racial prejudice. He was one of only 11 black recruits in his training platoon, and the drill instructors seemed to take special pleasure in pushing them beyond their limits. During marksmanship training, however, Anderson distinguished himself immediately. His scores on the rifle range were nearly perfect, catching the attention of Captain Michael Trevino, an instructor at the Scout Sniper School. After witnessing Anderson put 10 shots inside a 3-inch circle at 500 yards, Trevino pulled him aside. "Private, have you ever considered sniper school?" he asked. Anderson's response was immediate. "It's the only reason I joined, sir." The Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton was even more demanding than boot camp, but Anderson thrived in its technical precision. He absorbed lessons on ballistics, windage, elevation, and camouflage, with an intensity that impressed even the most seasoned instructors. What truly set him apart, however, was his intuitive understanding of optics. During one field exercise, when his scope fogged up in the early morning dew, Anderson quickly disassembled it and modified the internal O-rings using materials from his kit, a solution his instructors had never seen before. This improvisation earned him both admiration and suspicion from his superiors, who valued protocol over innovation. Anderson thinks differently. His final evaluation read, "Exceptional marksmanship, but tendency toward unorthodox methods requires monitoring." He had no idea that soon, those instincts would be all that stood between his fellow Marines and annihilation in the remote mountains of Vietnam. By late 1967, Anderson had joined the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, serving as a designated marksman in a unit deployed to the northernmost regions of South Vietnam. The assignment to Khe Sanh came as tensions in the region were escalating dramatically. Located just south of the demilitarized zone and west of Quang Tri, Khe Sanh Combat Base sat precariously near the Laotian border, a strategic location that controlled access to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the vital supply route for North Vietnamese forces. The siege of Khe Sanh began on January 21, 1968, when North Vietnamese Army forces unleashed a massive artillery bombardment on the base, followed by a ground assault that threatened to overwhelm the approximately 5,000 Marines stationed there. The attack wasn't random. It was part of General Vo Nguyen Giap's larger strategy coinciding with the Tet Offensive, aimed at stretching American forces thin across South Vietnam. For the defenders of Khe Sanh, the situation was dire from the outset. Surrounded by an enemy force estimated at 20,000 strong, they faced odds of 4 to 1. The base itself consisted of a small airstrip, bunkers, and defensive positions scattered across several hilltops, all contained within a perimeter that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. President Lyndon Johnson, haunted by the specter of the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu 14 years earlier, demanded daily briefings on the situation and ordered his military commanders to hold Khe Sanh at all costs. "I don't want any damn Dien Bien Phu," he reportedly told Joint Chiefs Chairman General Earl Wheeler, mispronouncing the name of the famous French defeat. The comparison was apt. Like the French at Dien Bien Phu, the Marines at Khe Sanh were surrounded, dependent on aerial resupply, and under constant artillery bombardment. Between January and April of 1968, more than 100,000 artillery rounds would fall on the base and its outlying positions, forcing the Marines to live largely underground in bunkers reinforced with sandbags and whatever materials they could salvage. For Anderson and the other snipers, the siege created a paradoxical challenge. Their skills were desperately needed to counter the enemy officers directing the assault, but the intense bombardment made traditional sniper operations nearly suicidal. Standard operating procedure called for snipers to work in 2-man teams, a shooter and a spotter, from concealed positions outside the main perimeter. But with North Vietnamese forces controlling the surrounding hills, such movement became virtually impossible. Marine Corps Command, operating from the relative safety of Da Nang, issued orders for snipers to focus on defending the perimeter rather than offensive operations. Maintain defensive positions and engage targets of opportunity within established range parameters, the directive stated, effectively limiting snipers to shots under 800 meters, well short of the distances needed to target the NVA command elements. Colonel David Lowndes, commander of the 26th Marines at Khe Sanh, knew that disrupting the enemy's command structure could be crucial to surviving the siege. In a secure communication to his company commanders on February 2nd, he emphasized the need for innovative solutions to degrade enemy command and control capabilities. The message was clear to those who understood military euphemisms. Find a way to eliminate the enemy officers, by any means necessary. What Colonel Lowndes couldn't know was that one of his snipers had already been working on a solution that would extend the reach of American marksmen beyond anything the Marine Corps had officially sanctioned. A solution born not from military research and development, but from the resourcefulness of a young man who had spent his childhood creating something from nothing. By the first week of February, the situation at Khe Sanh had deteriorated further. Monsoon rains turned the red clay soil to mud, hampering movement within the base. The constant artillery barrage had destroyed several ammunition bunkers, and resupply aircraft faced intense anti-aircraft fire during their approach. Morale among the defenders was waning as casualties mounted, and the prospect of relief seemed increasingly distant. For Corporal Anderson, the constraints of the siege had become personal. 3 days earlier, his spotter, Lance Corporal Miguel Rodriguez from San Antonio, Texas, had been killed by mortar fire while attempting to observe NVA movements from a forward position. Rodriguez had been more than just a fellow Marine. He'd been the first person in the unit to treat Anderson as an equal, rather than a token integration success story. "My grandmother came from Mexico with nothing but hope," Rodriguez had once told him during a long night on watch. "Your people built this country without being asked if they wanted to. Seems to me we're both fighting for something bigger than what those officers back at headquarters can understand." The loss of Rodriguez left Anderson not only without a spotter, but without the friend who had helped him navigate the complex racial dynamics of a Marine Corps still adjusting to integration. Now, assigned to work with Corporal William Davenport, a taciturn Mississippian who had initially requested transfer to avoid serving with a black Marine, Anderson found himself isolated at the moment when teamwork mattered most. On the morning of February 4th, Anderson and Davenport were assigned to Hill 881 South, one of the strategic outposts surrounding the main Khe Sanh base. Their mission was straightforward: observe and report NVA troop movements, engaging only targets that presented an immediate threat to the Hill's defenders. The orders specifically prohibited movement beyond the defensive perimeter and limited engagement to targets within confirmed range parameters. As dawn broke through the heavy cloud cover, Anderson spotted unusual activity on a distant ridge, approximately 1,700 meters away, well beyond the effective range of their standard scopes under the poor visibility conditions. Through his binoculars, he could make out the silhouettes of what appeared to be officers gathered around a field table, likely planning the next phase of the assault. "I see movement at bearing 275, range approximately 1,700, Anderson reported to Davenport, who was scanning the sector through his spotting scope. "Too far," Davenport replied dismissively. "Can't confirm rank or intention at that distance in this weather. Standard protocol says we report and request artillery if they're confirmed command elements." Anderson knew that requesting artillery would likely result in a denied request. Ammunition was being carefully rationed, and without visual confirmation of high-value targets, such expenditure wouldn't be authorized. But he also recognized that they were witnessing a rare opportunity to disrupt the NVA command structure. "I can make those shots," Anderson said quietly. Davenport turned to him with disbelief. "Not with standard issue you can't. No one can. That's beyond max effective range, especially in this visibility." Anderson hesitated, then reached into his pack and withdrew the bamboo device he'd been crafting in secret over the past week. Using bamboo harvested from a stand near the base perimeter, glass lenses salvaged from a destroyed village, and techniques he'd learned building telescopes as a child, he had created a crude but effective amplification system that could be mounted above his standard scope. "What the hell is that contraption?" Davenport asked, eyes widening as Anderson began attaching it to his rifle. "Something my granddaddy would have called making do," Anderson replied. "It's a secondary magnification system. Adds about 3 power to our standard scopes. I've been testing it during night watches." Davenport's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "That's not regulation equipment. If anyone finds out—" "If it works," Anderson interrupted, "no one will care. If it doesn't, well, we're probably not going to make it through this siege anyway." The moment hung between them, the rigid adherence to protocol versus the desperate need for innovation that might save lives. Finally, Davenport nodded reluctantly. "I'll spot for you," he said. "But if anyone asks, I never saw that thing." Anderson settled into position, adjusting his body to create a stable platform for the shot. The bamboo scope looked absurdly primitive attached to the military-grade sniper rifle, but as he peered through it, the distant ridge suddenly resolved into clear focus. He could now distinguish insignia, facial features, and even the maps spread across the field table. "I count 6 officers," he whispered to Davenport. "One appears to be a colonel based on insignia, range 1,700 meters, wind approximately 8 miles per hour from the west." Davenport, still skeptical but professional, called out the adjustments. "Elevation for 1,700 meters puts you at 38 minutes. Wind call 3 minutes right." Anderson made the adjustments, then took a deep breath, exhaling halfway and holding. The crosshairs settled on the chest of the NVA colonel, gesturing at the map. "Send it," Davenport whispered. The rifle cracked, its report echoing across the valley. Through his improvised optics, Anderson watched as the North Vietnamese colonel crumpled to the ground nearly a mile away. Before the remaining officers could react, He had already chambered another round and acquired his second target. "Hit," Davenport confirmed, his voice betraying his astonishment. Adjusting left 1 minute for the next target. By the time the surviving NVA officers scrambled for cover, Anderson had fired 5 shots, resulting in 4 confirmed kills. The impossible had been achieved, precision long-distance kills far beyond the range Marine Corps doctrine considered feasible. As they gathered their equipment to change positions before potential counter-sniper fire could target them, Davenport looked at Anderson with newfound respect. "That wasn't just shooting," he said quietly. "That was something else entirely." Anderson merely nodded as he carefully disassembled his bamboo scope and tucked it away. Sometimes the rulebook doesn't account for what's possible. The ripples from Anderson's morning of impossible shots spread quickly through the besieged base. By midday, Lieutenant Colonel James Wilkinson, the battalion's executive officer, had requested Anderson's presence at the command bunker, a summons that typically signaled either commendation or court-martial. The command bunker was a reinforced structure, buried partially underground, its entrance sandbagged against artillery fragments. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the tension of men responsible for the lives of thousands. Colonel Lowndes and Lieutenant Colonel Wilkinson hunched over a tactical map, their faces illuminated by hanging lanterns that cast long shadows on the earthen walls. "Corporal Anderson reporting as ordered, sir," Anderson announced, standing at attention. Colonel Lowndes looked up, his weathered face betraying nothing. "At ease, Corporal. I understand you've been conducting some unorthodox operations this morning." Anderson hesitated, uncertain whether to admit to using unauthorized equipment. "Sir, I engaged enemy officers at range, as per directives to disrupt command and control capabilities." "At 1,700 meters?" Wilkinson interjected. "In poor visibility conditions, with equipment that isn't listed in any Marine Corps inventory." The moment of truth had arrived. Anderson straightened his shoulders, prepared to accept the consequences. "Yes, sir. I utilized a supplementary optics system of my own design to extend the effective range of my issued weapon." He expected immediate reprimand. Instead, Colonel Lowndes leaned forward with interest. "Show me." With careful movements, Anderson removed the bamboo device from his pack and demonstrated how it mounted to the standard scope. The officers examined it with professional curiosity rather than condemnation. "This is based on Galilean telescope principles," Anderson explained. "The forward lens captures and magnifies the image, while the rear lens further enhances it before it enters the standard scope. It effectively doubles the magnification without sacrificing light transmission." Lowndes exchanged glances with Wilkinson. "And you built this from bamboo and salvaged glass?" "Yes, sir. I've been experimenting with telescope construction since childhood. The principles are straightforward, even if the materials are unconventional." The colonel was silent for a long moment, weighing regulations against results. Finally, he asked, "How many confirmed kills with this device?" "4 this morning, sir, and I believe I wounded 2 others." Another long pause followed as the implications sank in. 4 NVA officers eliminated at a range previously considered impossible under battlefield conditions. "Normally, Corporal, I'd have you on the next chopper out of here facing charges for unauthorized modification of military equipment," Lowndes said gravely. Then his expression changed subtly. "But there's nothing normal about our situation here. We're surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of options. Sometimes unconventional problems require unconventional solutions." He turned to Wilkinson. "Get me Captain Reynolds from Charlie Company. I want to know if we can reproduce this device." Wilkinson nodded and exited the bunker, leaving Anderson alone with the colonel. "Sir," Anderson ventured, "with respect, mass production isn't necessary. I can teach other snipers how to construct these. Every sniper team could have one operational within 48 hours using materials we already have access to." Lowndes studied him thoughtfully. "You understand that what you're proposing goes against every protocol in the manual?" "Yes, sir. But the manual was written for conventional warfare. There's nothing conventional about Khe Sanh." A distant explosion rattled the bunker, as if emphasizing Anderson's point. After a moment, Lowndes nodded decisively. "You have 24 hours to train our other snipers, but this stays completely off the books. Officially, you're conducting advanced optical familiarization training. If this works, we'll deal with the bureaucracy later. If it doesn't..." He left the sentence unfinished. "I understand, sir." "One more thing, Corporal," Lowndes added as Anderson turned to leave. "Why didn't you bring this innovation through proper channels before deploying it in the field?" Anderson considered his answer carefully. "Permission would have been denied, sir. Some ideas need to be proven before they can be accepted." For the first time, the colonel's stern expression softened into something resembling a smile. "Carry on, Corporal. And for what it's worth, I believe your granddaddy would be proud." The next 24 hours transformed the sniper operations at Khe Sanh. Working with the 8 other scout sniper teams, Anderson demonstrated the construction and use of his bamboo scope enhancement. Some of the Marines were skeptical at first, particularly Master Sergeant Frank Westbrook, the senior sniper who had 20 years of experience and little patience for what he called field-expedient nonsense. "This isn't how the Corps trained us," Westbrook complained as he awkwardly held the bamboo attachment. "Looks like something out of Robinson Crusoe, not the United States Marine Corps," Anderson answered calmly. "With respect, Sergeant, the Corps trained us to accomplish the mission with available resources. Right now, our mission is to degrade enemy command capabilities, and standard resources aren't sufficient for the task." Private First Class Thomas Jenkins, a fresh-faced sniper who had arrived at Khe Sanh just 2 weeks before the siege began, was more enthusiastic. "My dad's a carpenter back in Oregon," he said as he carefully measured bamboo segments. "Always told me the right tool makes all the difference, no matter what it looks like." By dawn on February 6th, all 9 sniper teams had constructed functioning bamboo scopes based on Anderson's design. Each had been range-tested on the limited firing range within the perimeter, confirming increased effective range and accuracy. The morning briefing assigned teams to overlapping sectors around the base's perimeter, with explicit instructions to target enemy officers and radio men. "This operation does not exist on paper," Lieutenant Colonel Wilkinson emphasized. "Your mission logs will record only confirmed kills, not the means by which they were achieved. As far as Da Nang is concerned, you've all suddenly become exceptional marksmen." As the teams deployed to their positions, Anderson found himself paired with Davenport again, this time assigned to the northeastern perimeter, with a clear view of Hill 881 North, currently in enemy hands and serving as a primary staging area for attacks. "Things are different today," Davenport commented as they crawled into position before first light. "Yesterday you were risking a court-martial. Today you're practically running a sniper school." Anderson adjusted his camouflage and checked his weapon. "Yesterday and today aren't so different. We're still just trying to survive." As the morning mist began to lift, NVA forces became visible on the opposing hillside, preparing for what appeared to be another assault. Through his enhanced optics, Anderson could clearly identify officers directing the positioning of troops and weapons. At such extreme range, nearly 2,000 meters, even the sound of their rifles wouldn't reach their targets. "Range 1,900, Anderson whispered. 2 officers by the large boulder, directing mortar placement. Davenport confirmed through his spotting scope, now also fitted with a bamboo enhancement. "Confirmed. Wind is shifting, 5 miles per hour from the east now." Anderson made his adjustments and fired. Seconds later, the first officer fell. The second looked around in confusion, unaware that the shot had come from such an extreme distance. Anderson's second round found him before he could take cover. Across the perimeter, other sniper teams were engaged in similar operations. Private Jenkins and his spotter eliminated 3 NVA radio men in rapid succession from Hill 861. Staff Sergeant Wilson's team reported 4 confirmed kills of suspected officers near the northwestern approach. Even the skeptical Master Sergeant Westbrook radioed in confirmation of 2 long-range kills. By midday, 19 confirmed enemy officers had been eliminated, along with 11 radio men and 8 mortar crews. The effect on the North Vietnamese operations was immediate and profound. Their attack, which had been building momentum throughout the morning, suddenly faltered as command elements were eliminated faster than they could be replaced. Colonel Lowndes, monitoring the situation from the command bunker, observed the change in enemy behavior with cautious optimism. "They're confused," he noted to his staff. "Their assault elements are hesitating without clear direction." Captain James Wallace, the intelligence officer, added, "They're also pulling back from exposed positions. They can't figure out how we're targeting their command elements at such extreme range. It violates everything they know about our capabilities. This psychological impact proved almost as valuable as the tactical advantage. NVA forces began constructing elaborate overhead cover for their officers, limiting their visibility and effectiveness. Radio traffic, intercepted by American signals intelligence, indicated growing paranoia among the North Vietnamese command about the Americans' seemingly impossible accuracy at extreme distances. As night fell on February 6th, the sniper teams returned to the base perimeter, exhausted but triumphant. Their combined efforts had resulted in 38 confirmed enemy kills, 20 of them officers, without a single casualty among the sniper teams. It was an unprecedented achievement that defied conventional military doctrine. In the sniper unit's bunker, a makeshift celebration took place. Sea rations were shared, along with rare cans of beer that had been hoarded for special occasions. The racial tensions that had previously divided the unit seemed momentarily forgotten, as Marines who had once requested transfers to avoid serving with Anderson now sought his advice on improving their bamboo scopes. To Corporal Anderson, Sergeant Westbrook proposed a toast, raising his canteen cup. Who proved that sometimes the best solution isn't in any manual. Anderson accepted the acknowledgement with quiet dignity. To all of us, he countered, and to making it home to tell stories no one will believe. As the others laughed and continued their subdued celebration, Davenport pulled Anderson aside. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. When you first joined our unit, I was less than welcoming. Anderson nodded but said nothing, waiting for Davenport to continue. Where I come from in Biloxi, things are a certain way. People stay with their own kind. That's what I was taught. Davenport looked down at his hands. But out here, with death coming from every direction, I've realized something. The enemy doesn't care what color we are, and I'd rather have you watching my back than anyone else in this godforsaken place. It wasn't a grand declaration of brotherhood or a complete repudiation of his upbringing. But in the context of 1968 America, and particularly for a man raised in the segregated South, it represented a profound shift in perspective. Appreciate that, Anderson replied simply, extending his hand. Davenport took it without hesitation. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a runner from the command bunker. Corporal Anderson, Colonel wants to see you. Says it's urgent. Anderson exchanged glances with Davenport before following the runner through the darkened base, navigating by memory through trenches and around bunkers to avoid presenting targets to enemy snipers. When he arrived at the command bunker, he found not only Colonel Lowndes but also a visitor, a lieutenant colonel from the Force Logistics Command in Da Nang who had apparently arrived on the last resupply helicopter. Corporal Anderson reporting as ordered, sir. Colonel Lowndes nodded in acknowledgement. Corporal, this is Lieutenant Colonel Harris from Da Nang. He's here about your optical innovation. Anderson tensed, anticipating the worst. Had someone reported his unauthorized modification after all? Was he about to be removed from the field and court-martialed despite the success of his invention? Lieutenant Colonel Harris stepped forward, studying Anderson with intense curiosity. Corporal, I understand you've developed some sort of field-expedient optical enhancement system? Yes, sir, Anderson replied cautiously. A supplementary scope constructed from available materials. Harris exchanged glances with Lowndes. And this system has enabled unprecedented accuracy at extreme ranges? It has been effective, sir, yes. Harris paused, then continued in a measured tone. Intelligence reports from this sector over the past 48 hours have caught the attention of some very senior officers, Corporal. The sudden elimination of 20 NVA officers at ranges exceeding standard capabilities has raised questions that demand answers. Anderson remained silent, uncertain whether to defend his actions or prepare for charges. Normally, Harris continued, unauthorized modification of military equipment is a serious offense. However, he paused significantly. We're not fighting a normal war, are we? No, sir. I've been sent to evaluate your innovation and determine its potential for wider application. Harris revealed a notebook that had been tucked under his arm. I need you to document every aspect of its construction and use. Materials, measurements, optical principles. Everything. Anderson blinked in surprise. Sir, are you saying this is now an authorized project? Not exactly, Harris clarified. Officially, I'm here conducting a standard operational assessment. Unofficially, MACV headquarters is very interested in your bamboo scope. General Westmoreland himself has asked to be briefed on how Khe Sanh's snipers have suddenly become so lethal. The implications were staggering. What had begun as a desperate field improvisation might now influence Marine Corps sniper doctrine throughout Vietnam. There's one more thing, Colonel Lowndes added. While Lieutenant Colonel Harris is here to evaluate your innovation, we need to maintain operational security. The NVA are already adapting to our new capabilities. If they learned exactly how we're achieving these results. I understand, sir, Anderson responded. Secrecy is essential. Good. Lowndes nodded. You'll continue your operations while working with Lieutenant Colonel Harris to document your methods. But remember, officially, this conversation never happened. As Anderson left the command bunker, the weight of this new responsibility settled on his shoulders. What had begun as a simple act of necessity, an unauthorized innovation born from childhood experience, had evolved into something that might affect the entire course of the conflict. Yet he couldn't help but wonder if the Marine Corps, with its rigid adherence to protocol and established doctrine, would truly embrace a weapon system created by a black corporal using bamboo and salvaged glass. Over the next 2 weeks, Anderson's bamboo scope transformed the defense of Khe Sanh. Sniper teams operating with the enhanced optics eliminated a total of 73 confirmed high-value targets: officers, radio men, forward observers, and mortar crews, at ranges previously considered impossible for small arms fire. The psychological impact on the NVA forces was profound. Signal intercepts revealed growing frustration among their commanders about the inexplicable accuracy of American marksmen. One captured document referred to the ghost snipers of Khe Sanh, who could strike from invisible positions at impossible distances. NVA tactics shifted dramatically in response. Officers no longer moved openly near the front lines. Command posts were relocated to deeper positions, hampering their ability to coordinate complex assaults. Artillery spotters became reluctant to expose themselves, resulting in less accurate bombardment of the Marine positions. By February 20th, the tide had begun to turn. While the base remained under siege, the coordinated mass infantry assaults that had threatened to overwhelm the defenders in late January had diminished in both frequency and effectiveness. American air power, no longer hindered by spotters being picked off, delivered increasingly effective strikes against NVA positions. Through it all, Anderson continued refining his invention. Working with Lieutenant Colonel Harris, he documented precise measurements and techniques, even developing a standardized construction method that could be taught to snipers throughout Vietnam. The bamboo scope's design evolved to include weatherproofing techniques and more secure mounting mechanisms. On March 7th, Anderson was summoned to the command bunker once again. There, Colonel Lowndes informed him that he was being rotated out of Khe Sanh on the next available flight. Orders from Da Nang, Lowndes explained. You're being temporarily assigned to the sniper instructor group at Camp Pendleton. Apparently, your expertise is needed for a special training initiative. Anderson understood the subtext immediately. They wanted him to teach others his techniques, to formalize what had begun as a desperate improvisation. What about my team, sir? He asked. What about Khe Sanh? The siege is breaking, Lowndes replied with cautious optimism. Your innovation has been a key factor in disrupting the enemy's command and control. Intelligence suggests they're beginning to withdraw forces to deal with pressure elsewhere. As for your team, he hesitated briefly. Corporal Davenport will take lead on your sniper element. He's been recommended for promotion based partly on his performance with your enhanced optics system. The next morning, Anderson found himself aboard a CH-46 helicopter lifting off from Khe Sanh's battered airstrip. As the aircraft gained altitude, he looked down at the base that had been his home for the past months. The sandbagged bunkers, the shell craters, the weary Marines still manning their positions. Somewhere down there, Davenport and the others were continuing the work he had started, using bamboo scopes to extend their lethal reach beyond what military doctrine had thought possible. The helicopter banked steeply to avoid potential ground fire, and Khe Sanh disappeared from view. Anderson leaned back against the vibrating fuselage and closed his eyes, uncertain whether he was being honored or silenced. His arrival at Camp Pendleton 3 days later brought a partial answer. rather than the public recognition one might expect for a Marine whose innovation had saved countless lives. Anderson found himself sequestered in a small office with a classification officer who handed him a non-disclosure agreement. "By signing this," the officer explained, "you agree not to discuss the specific construction or capabilities of your optical enhancement system with anyone not specifically authorized by Marine Corps intelligence." Anderson read the document carefully. "May I ask why, sir? If this system is as effective as experience suggests, shouldn't it be widely implemented?" The classification officer's expression remained neutral. "The official position is that premature disclosure could compromise tactical advantage. The enemy adapts quickly to known capabilities." Left unspoken was what Anderson suspected was the real reason. The Marine Corps was uncomfortable acknowledging that one of its most significant tactical innovations of the Vietnam War had come not from research laboratories or defense contractors, but from a black corporal using bamboo and scavenged glass. Nevertheless, Anderson signed the document. Over the next 4 months, he worked with a small team of engineers and optics specialists to refine his design into something that could be manufactured using modern materials while maintaining the optical properties of his original invention. The resulting device, officially designated the Special Purpose Scope Attachment XM3, bore little external resemblance to his bamboo creation, but operated on identical principles. By August 1968, the first production models were being field-tested by select sniper units throughout Vietnam. Reports confirmed their effectiveness: extended range, improved visibility in adverse conditions, and enhanced accuracy at distances previously considered beyond the capabilities of small arms fire. Anderson himself never returned to Vietnam. After completing his consultation work on the XM3 project, he was assigned to administrative duties at Camp Pendleton until his honorable discharge in 1970. His official record contained no mention of his bamboo scope innovation, merely noting special technical consultation assignments during his final year of service. Upon returning to civilian life, Anderson maintained his silence about his contribution to sniper technology, honoring the non-disclosure agreement he had signed. He settled in Oakland, California, where he used the mechanical and optical skills he had developed to establish a small but successful camera repair business. He married Ellen Richards, a schoolteacher, in 1972, and they raised 2 children, a son who would later serve in Operation Desert Storm, and a daughter who became an optical engineer for NASA. For decades, the story of the bamboo scope remained classified, known only to those who had served at Khe Sanh during those crucial weeks in February 1968. The official history of the siege mentioned improved sniper effectiveness, but attributed it to enhanced training and tactical positioning. Technical manuals for the XM3 scope attachment, which entered limited service in 1969, made no reference to its origins in a makeshift bamboo device created by a Marine corporal. It wasn't until 1997, nearly 30 years after the siege, that the story began to emerge. During a reunion of Khe Sanh veterans in Washington, D.C., William Davenport, by then a retired police officer from Mississippi, approached a military historian documenting oral histories of the Vietnam War. "There's something about Khe Sanh that's never been properly told," Davenport began. "Something about a Marine named Anderson and a bamboo scope that changed everything." The historian was skeptical at first. The idea that a handmade optical device could have significantly influenced a major battle seemed far-fetched. But as more veterans from the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines came forward with similar accounts, the story gained credibility. Thomas Jenkins, who had gone on to become an optometrist in Portland, Oregon, provided detailed descriptions of the bamboo scope's construction. "It was genius in its simplicity," he recalled. Anderson understood that sometimes the most effective solutions aren't the most complex ones. Master Sergeant Frank Westbrook, who had initially been the most skeptical of Anderson's innovation, perhaps offered the most powerful testimony. "I've served in 3 wars, the aging veteran stated, and I've never seen anything like what Anderson accomplished with that homemade scope. We were hitting targets at ranges that defied everything in the manual. The brass might not want to admit it, but that bamboo contraption saved hundreds of American lives." In January 2000, after a 3-year investigation that included declassified mission reports and technical evaluations, the Marine Corps officially acknowledged the role of what they termed field expedient optical enhancements in the defense of Khe Sanh. The carefully worded press release didn't mention bamboo or salvaged glass, nor did it name Corporal Anderson specifically, but those who had been there recognized the belated acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. For Anderson himself, the public recognition came too late. He had passed away in 1995 after a battle with lung cancer, likely the result of Agent Orange exposure during his service in Vietnam. He had taken the secret of his bamboo scope to his grave, never once violating the non-disclosure agreement he had signed, never seeking credit or recognition for an innovation that had saved countless lives. His widow, Ellen, received a letter from the Marine Corps in 2002, formally acknowledging her late husband's significant contribution to combat effectiveness through technical innovation during the siege of Khe Sanh. Accompanying the letter was a Bronze Star, awarded posthumously for meritorious service in a combat zone. The citation made no specific mention of the bamboo scope, referring only to technical initiatives that significantly enhanced operational capabilities. Ellen Anderson placed the medal in a shadow box alongside her husband's other decorations, but didn't fully understand its significance until a Marine Corps colonel visited her home in Oakland later that year. "Mrs. Anderson," the colonel said after introducing himself, "I'm here to tell you something about your husband that he was never allowed to tell you himself." Over the next 2 hours, the colonel explained how James Anderson's improvised bamboo scope had changed the course of the battle at Khe Sanh, how it had led to the development of advanced optical systems still in use by military snipers, and how the principles behind it had influenced a generation of combat optics. "Why now?" Ellen asked when he had finished. "Why acknowledge this after all these years?" The colonel's response was measured. The specific technical details remained classified until recently. "But there's another reason. The Corps is trying to correct some historical oversights, particularly regarding the contributions of minority service members. Your husband's innovation was one of the most significant field adaptations in modern Marine Corps history, and that deserves to be recognized, belatedly though it may be." In the years that followed, the story of James Anderson's bamboo scope gradually entered the unofficial lore of the Marine Corps scout sniper community. While not included in formal training manuals, it became a frequently told tale among instructors, an example of how ingenuity and resourcefulness could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. At the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, a small display case now contains a recreation of Anderson's original bamboo scope, constructed based on the detailed notes he provided to engineers in 1968. Next to it stands a modern sniper rifle, equipped with a state-of-the-art telescopic sight, capable of accurate fire beyond 2,000 meters, a capability that traces its lineage directly back to those desperate days at Khe Sanh. In 2008, during the dedication of this display, Sergeant Major Michael Barrett addressed a class of sniper trainees. "The lesson of Corporal Anderson isn't just about marksmanship or optics, it's about the Marine Corps ethos of adapting and overcoming. When standard equipment and doctrine prove insufficient, Marines find a way. Sometimes that means looking beyond the manual, beyond what's authorized or conventional. Sometimes it means having the courage to risk your career to save your fellow Marines." The most profound legacy of Anderson's innovation, however, may be found not in technology, but in the changed perspectives of those who served with him. William Davenport, who had initially requested transfer rather than serve with a Black Marine, became a vocal advocate for civil rights after returning from Vietnam, eventually serving as a community liaison officer, specializing in race relations for the Biloxi Police Department. "My transformation began at Khe Sanh," Davenport explained in an interview for a documentary on racial integration in the military. "When I saw what Anderson accomplished with that bamboo scope, how his ingenuity saved so many lives, I had to confront everything I'd been taught about race. Here was a man I would have avoided back home becoming someone I trusted with my life. It changed me in ways that went far beyond the battlefield." Thomas Jenkins echoed this sentiment. "Before Vietnam, I'd barely known any Black Americans. My hometown in Oregon was pretty homogeneous. Anderson showed me that brilliance doesn't care about color. That lesson stayed with me my whole life." For the Marines who survived Khe Sanh, Anderson's bamboo scope represented more than a tactical advantage. It became a symbol of what could be accomplished when necessity overcame prejudice, when innovation transcended doctrine, and when one individual's courage rippled outward to save hundreds. Colonel David Lowndes, who commanded the 26th Marines at Khe Sanh and made the crucial decision to authorize Anderson's unorthodox innovation, reflected on the experience years later. In war, you quickly learn to value results over procedure. Anderson showed us that sometimes the solutions we need don't come from the top down, but from the bottom up. That's a lesson military leadership too often forgets until necessity forces us to remember it. In the final analysis, the story of James Anderson's bamboo scope illuminates a truth about military innovation that transcends any single conflict or era. Throughout history, from the trenches of World War I to the mountains of Afghanistan, some of the most significant advances in warfare have come not from research laboratories or defense contractors, but from the desperate ingenuity of frontline troops adapting to immediate challenges. What distinguishes Anderson's innovation was not merely its effectiveness, but the context in which it emerged. In 1968 America, a Black Marine had to overcome not only the technical challenges of creating an enhanced optical system from scavenged materials, but also the social barriers that might have prevented his innovation from being recognized and implemented. That his bamboo scope was eventually accepted, indeed, that it became the foundation for officially sanctioned equipment, speaks to the power of demonstrated results to overcome institutional resistance. In the crucible of combat, with lives hanging in the balance, what mattered was not the inventor's race or rank, but whether his creation could extend the lethal reach of Marine snipers beyond what had previously been possible. For modern military planners, the lesson of Anderson's bamboo scope remains relevant. Sometimes the most effective solutions emerge not from formal research and development processes, but from the creative adaptations of those directly engaged with the problem. The challenge lies in creating systems that can recognize and rapidly evaluate such innovations, separating the truly valuable from the merely unorthodox. For the broader society, Anderson's story offers a different lesson about how individual talent and contribution can transcend the artificial barriers of race and class, even in eras when such barriers seemed insurmountable. His innovation saved lives not because he was a Black Marine, but because he was a skilled and resourceful Marine who happened to be Black, a distinction that some of his comrades only came to understand through the shared experience of combat. In 2018, 50 years after the siege of Khe Sanh, Ellen Anderson donated her husband's personal papers and effects to the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Among them was a small notebook containing sketches and calculations for optical systems, including the original design for his bamboo scope. These materials, now accessible to researchers and historians, have helped to solidify Anderson's place in the unofficial pantheon of military innovators whose field adaptations changed the course of battle. Yet perhaps the most fitting memorial to James Anderson and his bamboo scope isn't found in any museum or military installation, but in the lives of the Marines who survived Khe Sanh because of his innovation. Men who returned home, raised families, built careers, and contributed to their communities, all because one Marine had the courage to challenge conventional limitations and the skill to create something extraordinary from the simplest of materials. In the quiet moments before dawn on February 4, 1968, when Corporal James Anderson Jr. first mounted his handmade bamboo scope to his sniper rifle, he couldn't have known the far-reaching implications of his act. He was simply a Marine trying to complete his mission with the tools available to him, drawing on childhood experiences to solve an immediate problem. That his solution would influence military optics for decades to come, that it would help break down racial barriers within his unit, that it would save hundreds of lives. These consequences lay beyond his immediate horizon. And therein lies perhaps the most profound lesson of his story. That acts of courage and ingenuity, even when undertaken for the most pragmatic of reasons, can ripple outward in ways their initiators could never have anticipated. One Marine's bamboo scope, crafted in desperation amid the mud and artillery fire of a besieged combat base, came to symbolize not only military adaptation, but the larger truth that innovation can emerge from anywhere, even from those whom society has too often overlooked or underestimated. As we reflect on the siege of Khe Sanh and the countless other battles of the Vietnam War, we are reminded that history is shaped not only by generals and politicians, not only by grand strategies and geopolitical calculations, but also by the individual choices of those on the front lines, men and women who, when faced with seemingly impossible challenges, find ways to overcome them through courage, skill, and the quintessentially human capacity for innovation. Would you have broken the rules to save your fellow Marines? Would you have risked court-martial to extend the reach of your rifle beyond what doctrine deemed possible? These are questions each of us must answer for ourselves. But in the story of James Anderson's bamboo scope, we find a compelling argument for the power of necessary disobedience, for the courage to challenge convention when lives hang in the balance. Share this story so others may remember what real courage means: the courage to see beyond limitations, to innovate when resources are scarce, and to act decisively when hesitation means defeat. In a world increasingly defined by technological sophistication, Anderson's bamboo scope reminds us that the most powerful resource in any conflict remains the human capacity for ingenious adaptation.